Luxury cars. Fancy, but that sometimes comes at the cost of usefulness. On the other end of the spectrum, practical cars. Yes, they can definitely be the Swiss Army knife on four wheels, but that can come at the cost of also being boring. Now, over the years, there have been rare successful combinations of the two, but what happens when it comes time to evolve that equation? Can one change the formula without screwing it up?
So this is a story that started in the 50s with General Motors, where they had to change cars every single year to get people interested to buy them. Now, car companies really can't afford every single year, so what they do is they change them every like 3 years in what they call a mid-cycle refresh, and then we get into a big change every now 5 to 7 years. So we're here in that like speed bump era. So what's different? Well, the Eagle Eye will tell you that is the grille. Here, it's the same like shield they've got here, but what they've evolved is the pattern within the shield. Now this looks similar in that it's an idea that was stolen, if I'm honest, from Bentley, where it's a cross hatch, or what we call a diamond stitch, sometimes rendered in the seats. But instead of having one line in each direction, here now they have two lines. Now that's not the only thing they changed. They changed the front fascia, they've changed the rear fascia, but most importantly, the light signature. Now, you could say I'm pedantic for getting into details like this, but light signatures, it's kind of now the identity of a car company. Everyone does it. I think the best one was the Escalade, the previous generation Escalade, where you saw them from top to bottom. You know what that thing is. They're trying to do the same thing here, and this is a design we first saw. A concept car was a Depths of the Virus, where Sang-Yip brought it over from Korea and showed it to us one at a time. And that's where we saw this line, these two lines that are repeated through the fender. And now they have it in G90s as well as these. However, they've evolved the light to where the light is not one single light, it's individual elements. So there's more detailing in the light, much like the grille. And that's kind of the theme of the change in the design, where that's also repeated into the wheels. They've changed the wheels, still 20s and 21s, but the design, that's what's changed. What makes this thing go? That really hasn't changed. There is a 2.5 turbo, and then there's this, the 3.5 twin turbo V6. That is the one that has the most amount of power, and is surprising, as we learned in the previous version of it. Okay, so it may not be electric, but it is an SUV sort of crossover thing, which means it ain't light. 5,027 pounds, or depending on express weights and measures, 2,280 kilograms. If this was the four-cylinder bargain basement GV80, it would be about 200 pounds less with that. A little bit of delay there, but once it spools up, wow, this engine, we've driven in many like Hyundai, Kia, Genesis Group product. It's good. It spools up well. Yeah, they've got the version that's in the G90 that has the electric supercharger. And that, you could imagine in this application, would work well. And there we're going to find out. They're coming out with a GV80 coupe. So basically less you in your SUV. And they're putting the electric supercharger in that. So we'll find out what 409 horsepower does there. This, absolutely nothing to complain about. It works well in line with anything else that one would drive. The GLE, the BMW, the Lexus. Matter of fact, this probably delivers a little bit more immediate power than the Lexus. Now this one is fitted with an 8-speed torque converter automatic. Nothing's changed there. It works, like the personality works. That's the whole thing about this propulsion system in this vehicle. It's not fancy. It doesn't have an electric motor. There isn't some mild hybrid system. And all of that is a good thing. Why? Because it works in every environment this thing is designed for. It works especially well in parts of the world where there aren't hostile energy policies and one doesn't have to pay, what is it, $5.50 a gallon currently in California. Here in Texas, $3.35. So what they've done here is made it more fancy. Like, for example, the biggest thing you notice is this screen. That's what the kids want these days. However, what they've done here is they've given you the screen because you've asked for it. It's 27 inches. It's an OLED screen. So from a technology perspective, that's like bright, sharp color, so it doesn't get washed out in the sun. Most of these like wide screens, whether it be BMWs, Mercedes, or other Asian manufacturers, usually these wide screens are two screens put together, two 12-inch screens put together. This is one continuous screen. Now, the best way to understand how the real estate is parceled out on this screen is to go into individual applications, like go into map, and you will see the map is the entire screen. Now, you can set it up differently, but this is a fascinating use of the real estate. And the same is consistent all the way through the UX system from Genesis, which I have to say is one of the better ones. Why? Well, yes, they have the touch-sensitive buttons here. And in this case, they've moved that thumb wheel where they had the volume as well as the tuning. They've made it traditional knobs. Can I say vielen Dank? Then, of course, Genesis had to go make things fancy. Best example of that would be the unified controller. And perhaps a prudent way to describe it would be bejeweled. I believe that would be the right adjective for it. And what they've done is not gone the Bentley route where there's a diamond pattern around it. Rather, it's more pronounced. It sits higher. It's more akin to using a mouse because it sits higher. That sits in front of the typical rotary controller for transmissions. I'm not a huge fan of this, but I see why they do it to kind of make the whole thing work. Then they still have the biometric stuff they've done in other Genesis. Here it sits between the two controllers. Then you look at some of the colors in use here. What you're looking at is a blue with, I call it white, they've got some fancy term for this interior, and it is stunning with the capri blue exterior. However, they do this with other colors. They've got like a green with a saddle, a green with the white. So this way they're giving you these different themes on the inside. So there's a warm theme. I'd call this more of an ice theme. Everything you touch, even on the crappy ones, feels good. This one's better because it has Napa leather interior, but this one also has the faux suede headliner. Now here's where we get into a bit of a public service announcement. I am a stickler for never buy the car off the dealer lot. Take the time to spec the car you want and wait for it. You will thank yourself in the future. And one great example of that is speccing a car with the right colors. And in cases like Bentley's, Rolls-Royce's, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 cars, one can spec a headliner that's any color they want. But even like Porsches and BMWs and Mercedes, where I spend a lot of time talking about speccing those things out, yeah, one can have a suede or a faux suede headliner, but those, even with all that money, they're usually gray or black. Thus far, we've covered the bits that make it fancy. Now we have to have a discussion about the usefulness. The part that I don't like, the practicality, because I'm not a practical human being, which means the rear seat. Here, it's not exactly a torture chamber. There, a normal person can sit behind themselves. I am 6 foot tall, and as you can see, I can get here. But there is a couple of party tricks going on here. Yeah, the sunshades in this one, it's electric in the fancy one like this, manual in the basic ones. But here, this one has fancy seats that are electric. They go forward, backward, they kind of go up and down. And then I can put the seat back a little bit. It actually picks this up a bit more, where it's somewhat of a recline. Then I can see if I look pretty in this cute little mirror here, complete with a lamp. Yeah, of course, this HVAC controls back here and plugs up the wazoo. But most importantly, I have to focus on some of the other bits of practicality, and that is the storage. Now, remember, this is a 2-row SUV right now. We're looking at something that has a good amount of storage. Granted, my trusty Pelican is a barometer of how much space you got here. Then something interesting, you notice there is no tonneau cover here. That's not because this is the cheap one, it's because they have German efficiency, believe it or not. There's a lot of Germans that work for this company. So what they do is they hide the tonneau cover here to give you more opening back here, but then if you need it, you can pull this stuff up, bring the tonneau cover from here, put it in there, and hide it when you are parking it in questionable areas. Rather than playing a round of our famous game, the options game, let's have a discussion about money and other unfortunate things like inflation. You see, to have something that is both fancy and practical, one wouldn't expect it to be cheap, and this is really no exception. Now, the one that came before it, the one that came out in 2020, That started in the low 50s, which when you think in the grand scheme of things, that Nissan Rogues got to like 40 grand, this, which was miles better, bigger, drives better, of course I'm gonna pay an extra 10, 13 grand, whatever it was. But now the price has gone up. See, the most basic one is $57,700. You could imagine why this is the case. But the one you are looking at is not the most basic one. You see, the most basic one has a 2.5 turbocharged engine. That one does have some bits in it that make it somewhat fancy, but then you have to add in other things. Like if you want to get leather seats, you want to get in sunroofs, that's when we get into like 60 grand. Now, huge point of order. Whether it's a 4-cylinder or a 6-cylinder, they are now all-wheel drive in both the US and Canada. Used to be you could get a rear-wheel drive. Now that's for the cheap seats, which is also known as the 4-cylinder. What about the one with the 6-cylinder engine? There it's quite a jump. It goes to $73,800 for the most basic one. However, the one you are looking at is not the most basic one. That is the Prestige, which is $79,300. What's the difference? Well, this one has Nappa leather, 22-inch wheels. The back seats are electric, they're heated, they're cooled, and it has, most importantly, an electronic limited slip differential. One thing I found out from the product manager of this vehicle, Trevor, who you know from our Hyundai and the Kona N episode, he has now been promoted to the Genesis side of the world. It is not a brake-based system, so it actually works a bit more actively than other brake-based systems on vehicles like this. Either way, doesn't come cheap, because we still have to pay an extra $1,350 for destination handling from Korea, which brings us to a total retail price of $80,650 for a GV80. Now this is where we arrive at the unfortunate point of our discussion, inflation. You see, this vehicle, similarly equipped last year, maybe 3 years ago, I'd say was about $8,000 cheaper. Now granted, the stereo's different. They had a Lexicon before, now it's Bang & Olufsen. It does more different things. It is still a kicking stereo, but at the end of the day, that is the biggest difference in $80,000 to what was $73,000, $74,000. So don't shoot the messenger, just saying, prices are going up across the board. So I searched far and wide just west of Fort Worth, Texas, to find a crappy road to understand how this thing drives. Not really a surprise, it's kind of deja vu because we've been here before. Everything is set up the same. They've tweaked some things, yeah, but this drives well, and I'll tell you why. This is a rear-wheel drive based architecture. Now, why is that important? Well, when people think of vehicles like this, a lot of people think of the Acura MDX. No one thinks about Acura in any other area except for that. But the MDX is a really good vehicle, and they have the super handling all-wheel drive, which makes it decent to drive. But it's still really a front-wheel drive based architecture. This is based on a rear-wheel drive based architecture, so it's closer to that of the Mercedes-Benz GLE, the BMW X5, cars, or really SUVs, that people buy because the way they drive, not just because of the badge or a price or size, packaging. They're looking for a better experience. Here, it's not exactly to that level. It's not BMW, Mercedes good. It's like in between a traditional American luxury car, or what I would say like Lexus now, and a Mercedes here, somewhere on a spectrum like right about here. And as such, the ride quality is supple, it's good. You feel the road here. Like, I definitely feel this is a bad road. I don't think I'm driving on a pillow or it's a magic carpet ride. Okay, so let's get to the kind of geeky part of why it drives the way it does. There is an adjustable suspension on this, the fancy one. It's optional on the other ones. And it's not just that it has adjustable dampers to make it stiffer or softer. It kind of reads the road ahead of you, and it presets the suspension in anticipation of how good or crappy the road is. Is this to the point of like what Rolls-Royce does, where they use radar and then the maps and they input that into the suspension and then the transmission, and it even pre-selects? It's not to that level. However, where the rubber meets the road, the vehicle isn't a mess going down the road.
there is some composure, even though this thing is designed to be more luxury than it is like sport tourer.
So today's exercise was an unusual learning experience. Obvious question, why? Genesis is one of those companies that has announced, we're going all electric. Now, if you have been following the news over the past year or so, companies that have made that announcement, they're kind of living to regret it, whether you agree with electrification or not. The realities of life are starting to smack governments especially, but the car manufacturers that agreed with the governments across the face. So the plan is, many of those companies that were going all electric, they kind of pivoted, and they're bringing more gas or hybrids back to the market. Genesis is an unusual case because they have ICE vehicles in the market today that are unusually good. If I'm being very honest with you, this didn't need to change. It was that good. It's still one of the best in the pack, depending on how one likes the driving experience. Now I get it, Genesis, they want to start selling these things in regions of the world that require cars with electric motors. So, how about we make one of these with an electric motor, a mild hybrid, so you can extend the life of this vehicle or the one that replaces it. Because Genesis is at a point where they have very few missteps. The only one was the G90 recently, perhaps the GV60, depending on whether you like the design or not. But ultimately, at ICE, they're on top of their game. Let's start to bring in some electrification to extend out the product life cycle while everyone else jockeys for position in the future electrified world, which, whether you agree with me or not, will take a very long time. In the meantime, Genesis can perfect their craft and grow the company as a whole. But I'm one man, and this is the point of the episode, that I turn around to you guys to opine in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV, all one word, MotoManTV, all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, if you found value in this episode, I would highly suggest you watch one of our episodes where we drove a cousin to this vehicle, but we didn't do it on this, we did it off-road. And when I say off-road, not on a trailhead, I mean over logs. You can see the episode here. Until I see you in the next episode, bis später.